Super Mario 64. It's one of those games that has been discussed time and time again, but it's for good reason. It's one of the most beloved and influential games ever created. I mean, it set the standard for how we control characters in a 3D space. That's pretty incredible. Being able to control a game's camera in conjunction with the character's movement was unheard of. Before this, it was either a fixed camera or tank controls. Modern 3D controls are trivial these days, but at the time, this was revolutionary. Mario 64 did a lot for 3D game design and set the standard for other 3D platformers to come. Now, all of this is great, but there's always the critical side of things. The cultural impact is never going away, but there's always the question of how well does it hold up? And for a lot of people, it does. But like a lot of games from this generation, it's seen its fair share of criticism over the years, mostly from 20-somethings who didn't grow up with it, and that's fair. Nostalgia and personal feelings are factors for many people. But for me, it's a bit different. I adore Mario 64 and always have, and that's coming from a 17-year-old who played this game alongside modern 3D games. So, let me show you why I, and so many others, still love Super Mario 64. The game starts off with Peach inviting you to the castle, where she inevitably gets kidnapped by Bowser. We then get this short but very sweet cinematic of the camera flying around the castle, really showing off what the Nintendo 64 is capable of. Mario then hops out of a pipe, and the game officially begins. Now, I could be cliche and talk about this area here, and I will. It gives you a chance to get a feel for Mario's controls and how he responds to the environment. I think this goes to show how new this all was to people, so it was a great idea to have an area like this at the start. Like the concept of an in-game camera was conveyed in the most literal way, and they made it to where Lakitu is filming this and the C buttons control him. It's a pretty neat way of presenting a new concept. But back to the outdoor area though. It's pretty redundant now, but luckily you can just walk straight to the castle. It's a pretty interesting tutorial-like area since it doesn't treat the player like an idiot and lets you figure it all out yourself at your own pace. When you enter the castle, Bowser's voice echoes through, letting you know that he has once again captured the princess. So it's up to you to get her back by retrieving Power Stars. This is the game's main collectible, and the castle is the game's hub world. You access many worlds via these paintings, which is something that has become an iconic part of Mario 64. The castle is split into 3 separate floors, but the basement and top floor are locked until you find their respective key. Each level contains 6 stars, well, 7 if you count the 100 coin missions, and each star presents its own mission. One may have you fight a boss, complete a simple task, or have you explore a particular area. During the transition to 3D, the developers had to rethink how Mario game design should be handled. Instead of taking the Mario World approach, where there were several linear levels in succession, they decided to craft large levels with a lot to do in them. This approach would grow and evolve as time went on, but it was done very well here. The word I would use to describe these levels is dense. These stages are pretty big, but they're packed with things to do. You'll turn around and there's something new to see. Take a cool mountain for example. Right at the start you have a cabin that takes you to a slide, then you find a baby penguin, and then you can sled down a slope, ride a ski lift. I think you get the picture. This design keeps things from getting boring or tedious. Even upon revisiting these stages, I still had a lot of fun exploring. Yeah, that's another thing, fun factor. These levels are simply fun to play. There's not much else to it. Also, I don't know how to explain it really, it's just good game. I also find the game's presentation to be a big factor as to why I still really enjoy Mario 64. I think the game holds up visually, all things considered. I mean, yeah, it's rough and blocky, but due to the more bright and cartoony art style, it looks alright. The character models are also interesting. Yes, they're dated and rough, but I don't know, they have a certain look to them. I always kinda liked the way Mario looks in this game for some reason. Like, you don't see these exact models anywhere else in the main series, so they stand out. They also just have a lot of charm in my eyes. The environments still hold up well and create a good atmosphere. I always find it neat when an old game can set a mood. Mother 1 also did this well, despite it being an NES game. Each course in Mario 64 has a distinct feel to it, aside from the ones that reuse level themes, but that's besides the point. Each level has something in it that sticks in your head. The Chain Chomp and Bon Battlefield, the penguins in Cool Cool Mountain, the spooky atmosphere in Big Boo's Haunt. I could go on. I really love stuff like this in games, and it's part of the reason why I still enjoy Mario 64 to this day and continue to revisit it. The music is pretty great as well, though there aren't as many tracks in the game, which kinda sucks, but I don't mind. It would have been nice to hear some more fitting tracks towards the end of the game though, but I digress. The songs here are very memorable and really add to the feel of each stage, which is what all video game music should do, really. And also, this game's credits theme is probably my favorite piece of music in all of gaming. Aside from that, you have the upbeat overworld theme, the fast-paced slider theme, and the beautifully serene Dire Dire Docks music. It's relaxing, but also has a sense of adventure to it. But then it's juxtaposed by this thing. Okay, can we talk about this for a bit? Mario 64 seems to be the game that scared people in one way or another. Ask anyone that has played this when they were young, and I'll guarantee that at least one thing freaked them out. It's weird, and nothing about this game was really meant to be that scary, but we peed ourselves anyway. For a lot of people, it was a piano monster in Big Boo's Haunt. It is a jump scare after all, so of course it'll make a little kid cry. I personally didn't find this thing scary, mainly because I already knew about it, but what did get under my skin was Unagi the eel in Jolly Roger Bay. This creature single-handedly made me afraid of going underwater in video games. I'm being completely serious. I was so afraid to go near him when I was little, and I never finished the level because of him. And I ended up having bad experiences in the water with other games after Mario 64, such as the giant squids in the Wind Waker, so that didn't help. Nowadays I can go up to the eel no sweat, but the trauma will never go away. Along with that, one of my good friends was also afraid of the giant fish in Tiny Huge Island as well, since it could kill you in one hit. There are even people who were freaked out by the endless staircase. Come to think of it, the music in Big Boo's Haunt is pretty dang creepy. Yeah, out of all the games in the world, you'd think that Super Mario 64 would be the last game on Earth to creep so many people out. But that's what's fun about it. Like I said, this game is very memorable, and horror is memorable. But that still doesn't change the fact that I can't go underwater in a game without feeling tense even to this day. Oh, I should really get a life. Now, like I said in the beginning, people have come out and expressed their gripes toward Mario 64. However, I disagree with many of these claims, to an extent. Most of the issues people have stem from dated design elements. Plenty are quick to point out the fact that you get booted out of a stage every single time you get a star. And yeah, it's a little annoying at times, but I honestly don't care. It's such a minor thing for me, and I never even thought of it as a problem until I heard other people point it out. While it is true that this design became very dated very fast, with games like Banjo-Kazooie and Spyro throwing this design out the window shortly after Mario 64's release. Though, I still don't think there's much wrong with it per se. Would it have been nice to have this removed? Well, of course, it would have saved a lot of time. But most courses are so wide open that you rarely go the same way twice. However, it's still pretty annoying when playing more linear levels since it is very repetitive then. But even still, it's something that could be avoided. One of my favorite aspects of Mario 64 is its progression. You have so much leeway in terms of how many stars you want to get and what order you want to play the levels in. This allows the player to experience the game how they want. If you don't really like a level, then you can most likely skip it entirely. You only need a minimum of 79 out of the 120 stars to access the final level. That's a lot of wiggle room. So if you're getting bored of a level, then you can just leave and go somewhere else if you want. I don't really see why people make such a big deal out of the boot out system other than it's a little annoying. People also love to complain about this game's camera all the time. Unlike modern games where you have full 360 control over the camera, Mario 64 instead has you rotated in increments, People say this never lets you get a proper view and is just a giant pain to deal with. And yeah, it can get annoying on occasion, but I never found it to be much of a nuisance at all. I could count on just one hand of the number of times I got actively frustrated with the camera. Is it the best camera ever? God no, but it does its job just fine. In fact, I was hardly thinking about the camera during my playthrough in the first place. But that's just me, I guess. I think my personal biggest issue with Mario 64 are the levels on the top floor. The first floor and basement hosted some fantastic levels, Bob-omb Battlefield, Cool Mountain, Big Boo's Haunt, etc. But the quality of the levels towards the end are nowhere near as good. They feel far rougher and unpolished than the previous courses. Much more frustrating elements pop up here. You can really tell that they probably didn't put as much time or effort into these. They're not bad though. In fact, I think Wet Dry World is pretty creative and memorable. But Snowman's Lane is also pretty enjoyable, albeit simple. But then you have stuff like Tall Mountain, which is just annoying and extremely repetitive. Like, if you screw up, you'll be punished pretty hard. I do want to stress that these aren't bad levels at all. They're fine, but just not as good as the ones that came before. That's all. I don't even find the tick-tock clock to be all that bad. Another major point of contention that people have with Mario 64 nowadays is the controls. Listen to any 20-something that has played this for the first time. They'll say that it's too sensitive or they're imprecise, but for me, I don't really take much issue with these controls. They work well in this game because the levels were designed around them, most of the time. I'd imagine that Mario 64's controls are a bit awkward at first, especially if you're used to later entries in the series. Now, I do think that there are issues with the controls. They feel very rough and aren't the most precise, as in they don't really work well when there's precise platforming involved. It's easy to just slip off a platform and die, which can get pretty obnoxious. I also found that momentum is a tad wonky here. It's hard to both get and keep momentum. I think this is partially due to Mario feeling a bit heavy. And again, this isn't really a big deal until you have to do more intense platforming. And that's because the majority of these levels are very wide open and let you move freely. So, in those cases, the controls are perfectly fine. Mario's general movement is smooth, jumping feels pretty good, and it's a lot of fun doing tricks. But there's another factor at play here, and that's the controller itself. If you play this game via a PC emulator with, say, an Xbox One controller, for example, the game will feel very sensitive. Same goes when playing on the Wii U with a Pro controller. However, when playing this game on original hardware, the controls are much less touchy. This is because the N64 controller is very low tech. It's far less advanced than a modern controller. To compensate, the developers decided to program the game with overly sensitive controls to balance things out. And so when played with a modern controller, you're feeling that high sensitivity. So to anyone who is annoyed with the game's controls, that could be why. I found that the Wii Classic controller worked extremely well with the Virtual Console release on Wii U, though there's another aspect of the controls that many people do praise, that being the sense of skill mastery. Watch any Mario 64 speedrun and you'd know that people can absolutely shatter this game to pieces. You can pull off tricks in this game that were never intended by the developers. I personally can't perform any of these tricks, but I would like to learn how one day. From what I can tell, these tricks are quite satisfying to pull off, and you feel like you're really cheating the game. And I mean that in a good way. It's probably a more rewarding experience than performing advanced maneuvers in Odyssey in my eyes, because it's more streamlined there. Not to say there's an issue with Odyssey, but you get what I mean. And once you've collected enough stars, you can go off to face Bowser. This fight isn't much. It's the same as previous fights, just a little harder. And by harder, I mean the ground breaks apart. That's kind of it. The atmosphere is top notch though. The green lighting and the blaring organs set the mood well. And then when you beat Bowser once and for all, you get a grand star and fly off while a triumphant tune plays. You then return to the castle and Princess Peach is saved. Mario also gets insanely friend-zoned, but I'm not going to make fun of him because I can't get that kind of contact if I try. So, that was Mario 64. And I know I spent a lot of this video arguing against many of the complaints, but that's really what I felt like doing. I still love this game even today, flaws and all. It's an incredibly fun and memorable game that is worthy of its status as an all-time classic. It left a huge impact on the industry and people still care about it. The speedrunning community is thriving, ROM hacks are still being made of it, and new discoveries are being made all the time. I find it strange how I enjoy this game to the level I do since I am so young. Nothing really screams dated or clunky to me. I just enjoy it for what it is, a fantastic 3D platformer. While I don't have any major nostalgic connections to this game, it was a game that was always there. I've been playing this game for several years. It was always right there on my Wii home screen, ready to be played whenever. While I never beat this game until this very video, I played the levels on the first 2 floors countless times. Running around, exploring, stomping on enemies, defeating bosses, and enjoying the music are all things I remember fondly from Mario 64. It's also one of the few games that my friends have all played at one point. We can all mostly recall our experiences and talk about it, which is always nice since I'm friends with a bunch of Xbox gamers. They haven't exactly fallen in love with the same games I have. And overall, Mario 64 is honestly one of my favorite games in general. While I think the Galaxy games are far better, I still greatly enjoy and value 64 a lot. It's a game that I've come back to time and time again, and I doubt that's going to stop anytime soon.